We're back. The first race of the T100 series is just around the corner and the women's start list is huge. Going to run through who's racing, who's missing out, how I see the race playing through, and who's my pick for the win. Let's dive into it. Okay, here we go. And how this is going to work is I'm going to try and visualize here how I think through the race and how I think everything's going to play out. So we'll start with who's actually racing. So I've got all of the 20 contracted athletes here, and out of the 20 athletes that were signed, there's 12 racing. And you may look at that and think, wow, it's a lot less than the men that had 17 of their contracted athletes racing. But there are a few sort of key reasons why. So the first one is you've got Taylor Knibb and Taylor Spivey and Flora Duffy, all short course athletes that will be building towards the Olympics. So we're unlikely to see them pre-Olympics, so we probably won't see them until Ibiza. I guess the one to call out is Flora Duffy. Because she's missed so much time through injury, she didn't race at all last year, she currently doesn't have the ranking points to get onto a WTCS start list. So that could mean if she wants to race a top level race before the Olympics, she could potentially come and race a T100 race. It's still probably unlikely, but more likely than Spivey and Knibb, who are both lining up at WTCS Abu Dhabi the same weekend as Miami. Now, the next reason why we're missing some athletes, the series was announced quite late, and by that point, some athletes had already been planning their season. So Amelia Watkinson and Chelsea Sodaro both signed up to race Ironman New Zealand, which happened this weekend. Chelsea Sodaro won, Amelia Watkinson came fifth, but that means they're not going to race in Miami. Now, we've got 3 athletes that have just decided against racing in Miami. So the first is Ashley Gentle. She's decided to skip the long haul travel and she'll open her season in Singapore in April. The next is Laura Phillip. Again, she's decided to skip Miami. She's been down in Nice doing some course familiarization for the World Champs later this year. And I did hear she might not be racing until the San Francisco race in June. So she'll be missing Miami and Singapore, which means she have to race all the other 6 races. That could be because she's prioritizing validating her slot for Nice. So maybe we'll see her somewhere like South Africa racing an Ironman. And the last one is Marjolaine Pierre. Now, I haven't seen a reason why she isn't racing. She could just be choosing to get a bit more training in, build the fitness, and then start her season a little bit later. So here are the 12 athletes that we've got left, the 12 contracted athletes that are racing. So with 8 athletes out, we've got 8 wildcards to run through. So the first of our wildcards is Sarah Perez Sala. She's raced in Miami numerous times before, really strong swimmer, really strong cyclist, so she'll be at the front of the race from the gun. Next, we've got Hayley Chura, another really strong swimmer. She placed 5th at Miami last year behind Sarah Perez Sala, as well as a top 10 finish at the US Open in Milwaukee. Then we've got Lucy Buckingham, another really strong swimmer. So with Sarah Perez Sala and Lucy Charles Barkley, we've got 3 of the best swimmers in the sport, so they're going to hit it hard when that gun goes. Next, we've got Jackie Herring. She's raced 4 PTO races before, but hasn't cracked the top 10 yet, so we'll see what she's got in Miami. Next, we've got Kaidi Kivoya. She stepped up to long course after the Tokyo Olympics and placed 12th at 70.3 Worlds last year. Then we've got Didi Dietrichs. She had 4 podiums last year, but struggled at some of the bigger races, so she came 20th at the European Open. Then we've got Marta Sanchez. Now, she's one of the only athletes who's raced already this season. She won her first Ironman 70.3 race in Pucón in Chile in January, so she might be a bit more prepared for this race than some of the other athletes. And then lastly, we've got Jodie Stimpson. So she won this race when it was Clash Miami back in 2021, but she missed a lot of racing over the last year or so and only really returned at the end of last season. She's definitely capable of sort of being up there in these kind of races, but it really depends on where her fitness is at. So now we'll move on to talk about the favourites among this field. And I think, like I said with the men's race, it's so early in the season, we don't really know where the fitness of the athletes are at, who's trained well over winter, who will be ready to start their season so early. So we need to think through who started their season well before, who generally takes a few races to sort of get up to speed and really get into their season. So we can think about those things to sort of gauge where the athletes might be at based on prior performances. First off the bat, Annie Howe is a clear favourite. She's the only athlete in the field that's won one of these races before, and she also kicked off her 2023 season in really fine form, and her run was completely on fire, and that led her to win the European Open in May. Now, joining Howe in sort of my top tier of favourites is Lucy Charles Barkley. I didn't really expect to see her at this race. I think she'd sort of hinted that she might be delaying the start of her season until April for the Singapore race, but clearly she must have recovered from the calf injury that she picked up just before Kona, and presumably is feeling pretty good going into this race. And looking at the wild cards that have been added to this race with Sarah Perez Sala, Lucy Buckingham, that plays plays into Lucy Charles-Barclay's hands. She's going to have company in the swim and then possibly have company on the bike, and they could go all the way to T2 together. So that means she doesn't have to go solo the whole day to really win the race. Then in my next tier down, I've got Tamara Jewett. Now she sort of shocked everyone at the start of last season, winning Ironman 17.3 Oceanside. So clearly she can kick off the season on a high. And of all the athletes, she's probably got the most to gain from an off season of work. This is only her second season as a full-time pro, so those winters become even more valuable. Another really dangerous runner is Emma Pallant-Brown, and if you've listened to her at all so far this season, you'll know that she's been racing a lot, and not triathlon races. She's been doing bike races, running races, and she recently just set a new 10k PB, so clearly she's in very good run shape, and that could put her right at the front of the race in Miami. She has had issues in the heat at Miami before, so let's hope she's figured those out. Then it's worth mentioning a few other of the top athletes that will be sort of in contention throughout the race. So first is Daniela Ryf, and for me it's become sort of impossible to predict what version of her we're going to get. You could convince me that she's going to go in and win the race, or she's going to go and finish 15th. The variability in her performance seems at an all-time high at the moment, so we'll have to see what version of her we get. Next, Kat Matthews. Now she generally starts the season quite strong. She is one of the athletes balancing the T100 series with the Ironman Pro series, so we'll sort of see where she's prioritizing the racing, and this may be a bit of a tune-up race for when she heads to Ironman Texas. Paula Findlay is incredibly consistent over the 100k distance, but she is normally one of the athletes that takes a race to sort of build into the season. However, we could see that change given what's at stake with this racing and the level of the competitiveness. Then lastly, Imogen Simmons. Now she'll be in contention at every T100 race she does. With her swim and bike, she's going to be towards the pointy end of the race, but she has talked about that this is very early in the season and she's not really sure where her fitness will be. So I think that group of four are all capable of challenging for the win, but maybe it could be slightly too early in the season to see them really battling it out at the front of the race, but we'll have to see how the race plays out. Now, I touched on the course in my men's preview, so I'd go give that a watch if you haven't, but just quickly, the course is the standard Clash Miami course, obviously for the 100k distance. So there's a swim in the middle of the track, then they head out on the NASCAR circuit, but it involves a bit of a road circuit that can be described as technical depending on who you speak to, and then the run will be flat and fast. But the thing to be aware of is the potentially hot and humid conditions that the athletes will be competing in. Okay, so we'll jump into the swim, and how this is going to work is I'm going to put athletes into these different packs. So we've got front pack, chase pack, second pack and third pack, and I'll use this to sort of play through how I think the race is going to play out. So in the swim, starting with this front pack, obviously Lucy Charles-Barclay is going to be up there. She's the best swimmer in triathlon, and it's something I got to see in person recently when she popped up in the lane next to me at my local pool. However, she's going to have some company in this race. So in the wild cards, you've got Sarah Perez-Sala, and she has swam with Lucy Charles-Barclay multiple times, and she became the first person to outswim her in Singapore last year. So we'll definitely see her up there in the race. And then the other one to call out is another wild card, Lucy Buckingham. Now, she is one of the best swimmers in triathlon, and she's only raced Lucy Charles-Barclay once, which was sort of a fairly low-key race during COVID, and she swam on her feet then. So I definitely think we'll see that group of three coming out close together. Now, in this chase pack, I think it could only be a small group of athletes. Then we'll see some of them a bit further back. So I think we'll see Hayley Chura, another wild card. So we're really seeing these wild cards have sort of an early impact on the race. Hayley Chura, like I said earlier, she's raced in Miami before when she came 5th behind Sarah Perez-Sala, and she typically loses about 30 seconds to Perez-Sala. So maybe see her in that sort of 30-second region back from that front pack. Then the other athlete I see in this chase pack with Hayley Chura is India Lee. Now, she wants to avoid what happened at 70.3 Worlds, where she was sort of in no man's land between two different packs. So she'll definitely want to make sure she's following Hayley Chura's feet, but she could potentially be a bit of a dark horse for this race. She started quite well at the beginning of 2023 season, so we'll see where she's at in Miami. Now, I think that could be it for that first chase pack. I think there could be a little bit of a gap to this second one. So I think first up is Imogen Simmons. Now, she put together a crazy few weeks of racing where she was second at Ironman 70.3 European Champs, then went to the Asian Open and came 4th, and then went to 70.3 Worlds and came 3rd, all within a 3-week span. Now, there's a possibility of Simmons making that chase pack group, the next one up. If not, I think she's going to hit the bike hard to try and bridge up and ride with India Lee. Now, next in this second pack, I've got Marta Sanchez. So she swam swam with Imogen Simmons at Challenge Barcelona towards the end of last season, so I think we'll see the same again. Just going to move these sort of up and out of the way. Next, I've got Holly Lawrence. Now, after being sort of super consistent at these championship level races in 2022, she struggled a little bit in 23. I think she was 10th at the European Open, but then rallied at the US Open, finishing 5th. She's a strong all-rounder, but she did have a bit of a slow start to last season. Next, we've got Jodie Simpson. It's her first race over this distance, and we don't really know where her fitness will be at, but if she's there and in shape, she could be a threat. Next, I've got Paula Findlay. Now, she tends to be a bit of a slow starter. She's never podiumed the first race of her season, apart from 2020, where it was the only race. But we could see that change. There might be a bit more focus on hitting it hard the first race of this season because of the T100 series. And then I've got Daniela Ryf. Now, she sort of recovered her swim last year and was consistently swimming with this sort of group and caliber of athletes. But like I talked about earlier, she has the sort of biggest boom or bust potential. So it'll be interesting to see just where she's at and what level she's racing at. Now, I've got this second pack, and this is starting to get quite big, but I think there's another 4 athletes that could sort of latch onto it, or they may find themselves just off the back. So the first one I've got is Lucy Byram. Now, she didn't quite make this group in Milwaukee last year. She, again, similar to how India Lee at 70.3 Worlds, she found herself in between 2 different packs and was swimming by herself. But I think she can get onto the back of this pack. Similarly with Kat Matthews, like Byram, she missed this group in Milwaukee, but if you look at 70.3 World, she was swimming with Findlay and Ryf, so she could definitely find herself in this group. 2 more, so then next, Emma Pallant-Brown, and I think I've just been underrating where her swim is. Looking back at her last 3 championship level races, she's been swimming with this sort of group of athletes, so she could definitely find herself in here. And then the last one is Tamara Dewar, and similar to Pallant-Brown, I think I've just underrated where her swim is. I think it's been a bit up and down, a little bit hit and miss, but at these championship level races she's found herself on the back of this group, and then at some of the lower tier races she's sort of found herself a bit further back. So we'll see what version of her swim we get. And then moving back to this third pack, we've got Annie Haug. Now, she comes into this race with an insane record, 21 consecutive podiums, but this could be the year that really comes under threat. She sort of comes from the Dan Lorang coaching school, where you focus on a small number of races and really hit them hard and really target them specifically. Whereas this year, you've got to race 6 T100 races. If she's doing Nice, she's going to be racing that. She'll need to validate as well. So she's going to be racing 8 championship level races, and it's just impossible to really be at your peak for all of those. But like I've said, she is a clear favourite for this race. Next, we've got Skye Moench. I think, like most people, I was slightly surprised that she took this contract, because I think she would have been one of the favourites for that Ironman Pro Series. But you don't have to look back far to when she was finishing 6th at 70.3 Worlds in 2021, getting the better of some of these contracted athletes. So she's proven herself over that middle distance, and it'll be interesting to see what she can achieve when she's focusing on it for this first part of the season. And then we've got a few more wildcards to fit into this pack. So first is Jackie Herring. She typically swims with Skye Moench, so we'll probably see them together in the water. Then we've got Kaidi Kavoya. Again, at 70.3 Worlds, she swam in this kind of pack, so we'll probably see her there. And then Didi Dietrichs, she'll probably be off the back of this pack, so she might have her work cut out in the swim. Onto the bike, and this is where we'd normally see Charles Barkley coming out of the water by herself, driving away on the bike, but she's going to have company, and both Perez Sala and Buckingham are good cyclists, so we could see that group working together. Looking back at Clash Miami in 2021, when Charles Barkley and Perez Sala both raced, they came out of the water together and then rode together. So I think we'll see the same again here. And that really plays into Lucy Charles Barkley's hands. I've always thought if she's going to win one of these races, she's just got to go solo the whole way. But having athletes like this really plays into her hands, that she's not going to have to ride solo for 80k. She's going to be able to share that work. Next, into this chase pack, both Hayley Chura and India Lee are good cyclists. Lee's definitely better, so I think we'll probably see her potentially drop Chura. Then coming back into this big chunky second pack, think through who are going to be the aggressors in this pack. So to me, immediately someone like Imogen Simmons jumps out, so I think she's going to be moving up. We saw that at 70.3 Worlds, where she sort of went under the radar and was just away by herself for a lot of the race behind Taylor Knibb. Then the other one who I've talked about, who we don't really know what version of her we're going to get, but Daniela Ryf, move her up. At 70.3 Worlds, she was trying to push the pace early and break away from some of the other athletes we got in here, Findlay, Matthews, Pallant-Brown, but they stuck with her, and then eventually Ryf must have tired or sort of just gave up on breaking away and then sort of went to the back of that group. So she might try and do the same thing, get away early, see if it works, if not, preserve some energy. Now, the other one to call out is Lucy Byram. She was a demon on the bike at the US Open. Now, she came into that race with a bit of an injury, so decided to deploy different tactics on the bike and definitely pushed a lot harder because she had a run injury. She wasn't going to be able to run to her normal capabilities. But that clearly worked quite well, so I wonder if that will become more of a normal tactic. Maybe it's too early in the season for her to go to that, but we'll see how it plays out. So I think those are the three that will really be sort of driving the pace. I think Finley, Matthews, Pallant Brown, like they did at 70.3 Worlds, will all be there. And I think they'll try and follow those moves and probably will be able to will. But I think maybe they'll bide their time a little bit more. And then we've got the rest of this second pack with Sanchez, Lawrence, Stimpson and Jewett. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to follow those attacks, so I think we'll leave them in this second pack. Then coming back to this third pack, obviously Annie Haug is going to be moving through, so I'm going to move her to the front of this second pack. And I think also Sky Monch is going to be moving through. Jackie Herring tends to not be able to ride with Sky Monch, but she makes up some time on her on the run. Heidi Kavoya, she is a good cyclist, so I think she'll move up to the back of this group. And then Didi Dietrichs, she'll be bridging up out of the water, so she'll catch up with Jackie Herring. She's another good cyclist that we saw that at Ibiza last year. Okay, so this is sort of part way through the bike. We've got our front pack out front. This chase pack sort of come together. I think Hayley Chura might start to slip back. You'll see Lee and Imogen Simmons at the front. See what we get from Reef, and then Byram in there. Finley Matthews, Emma Pallant Brown. So then we've got sort of the established chase pack. So coming back to this second pack, Haug and Monch are going to be driving the pace. I think that will start to drop Sanchez and Jewett. We'll see how Tamara Jewett's improved on the bike, but I think she is going to move back throughout this race. So then we've got Lawrence in there, Stimpson and Kavoya. Now I think this is sort of roughly how it could stay until we get to T2. The pace may become a bit much for Pallant Brown and Chura, and I think we'll see Haug and Monch catch up to the back of Chura, so maybe I'll just move her down into this second pack. So then coming into T2, this is how I see it. You've got the group with Charles Barkley, Salah and Buckingham at the front. You've got this chase pack with some of those pre-race favourites, and then you've got this second pack spearheaded by Annie Haug. Now we'll have to see how much time that front pack have put into the rest of the field. They'll have 30 second to a minute gap out of the water, and then they've got the strength to ride time into the rest of the field depending on how aggressive sort of Byram, Reef and Simmons are. So they could come into T2 with a minute 90-second lead. Out of that front pack, Charles Barkley is definitely the strongest runner, so I think coming out of T2 she will start to move away from Perez, Salah and Buckingham. So I'm just going to move them back. And you've got Charles Barkley at the front there. Then in this chase pack, probably the key threats are Simmons, Finley, Matthews. Then Lee could be in there depending on how she's running. And then Reef and Byron might drop off a bit depending on how hard they've worked on the bike. And then we'll see where Emma Pallant Brown comes off in relation to these two. But you know she's going to be one of the fastest runners on course. So coming further back, obviously Haug is going to be running through. So I'm going to move her up into the back of this chase pack. And then skipping through the rest of these, the other big mover is going to be Tamara Jewett. She's going to be a big mover, and she's going to be coming up through these chase packs, and I'm just going to move her onto the back of this big chase pack. So this is the sort of position early in the run, and I'm going to focus on these top athletes, so I'm just going to get rid of some of these ones at the bottom. So we've got these three runners, Pallant Brown, Haug, Jewett, coming onto the back of this chase pack. Now they might be slightly separated depending where they come off the bike. It would be amazing to see them running together through the field, but I'm not sure we'll quite get that. And I think they'll slowly pick off the athletes in this chase pack. They're going to come through Reef and Byram, probably come through Lee and catch on to Finley, Matthews and Simmons. Meanwhile, I think Perez, Salah and Buckingham are sort of going to continue dropping off the pace, and they'll be caught by Finley, Matthews and Simmons. So I'm just going to move them off as well because I think they're going to fall further back through some of these favourites I had. And now we're getting deeper and deeper into the run, and again these three top runners, Pallant Brown, Haug and Jewett, you're going to see them keep moving through the field. So I'm going to switch these round. I'm going to move those runners ahead. Finley and Matthews and Simmons come back, and then I think we've moved back Lee, Reef and Byram. But I think the really exciting thing here is we've got 10 athletes battling it out for really the top 4 or 5 positions. It's quite difficult to make picks of who's going to be where. So I think this is going to be a really exciting race, and probably a better race than the men, where it feels like it's a bit easier to figure out what might happen. So Charles Barkley is going to be out at the front by herself. I'm expecting Annie Haug to be on the kind of run form she was at the start of last year. So I think she's going to keep moving through and catch up to the back of Charles Barkley and make the overtake like she did at Ibiza last year. Now I'm going to move Finley, Matthews and Simmons further back into this second chase pack, and then you've got Pallant Brown and Jewett in this first chase pack. So I think I've established in my head what the top 4 athletes are going to be. I think it's between Haug, Charles Barkley, Pallant Brown and Jewett. And like I said earlier, my sort of tier 1 favourites are Haug and Charles Barkley. So I definitely see one of them winning the race. Still not certain what version of Charles Barkley we're going to get. I think we have to assume she's going to be in good shape, probably better than she was in Singapore, but maybe not quite where she was at the end of last season. So I think I'm going to give the edge to Annie Haug to take the win like she did in Ibiza at the start of last season. So I'm taking Annie Haug first. I'm going to give Lucy Charles Barkley the edge over these other two. Now I think Emma Pallant Brown will get her first T100 podium. I think the fact that she's already been doing lots of racing, bike racing, running racing, she's going to come into this race ready and raring to go, and I think that will get her onto the podium. Then next I've got Tamara Jewett, and to round out the top 5 I've got to pick one of these 6 here, which I'm really struggling with. Paula Findlay is really consistent over this distance. Kat Matthews, you look at what she did at 70.3 Worlds last year, and same as Imogen Simmons where she had that crazy period of racing, so it's probably between those 3. I think Lee is a bit of a dark horse. Byram, we'll see, maybe it's a little bit early in the season, and then Daniela Reef, don't really know what version we're going to get. So out of these 3, Findlay, Matthews and Simmons, I think I'm going to go with Imogen Simmons to take that 5th spot. But really, it could be any of those 3 and any of those 6. But I think that's why this race is going to be so exciting. It's so hard to predict. There's so many top athletes. We've got 10 athletes here vying for the top 5 positions, and it's really quite difficult to figure out what's going to happen. So there we go. We've run through the race. I've made my top 5 picks. Let me know down below who you think's going to win, and I look forward to watching the race.